Let's get it started.
Double O.
Think like a rapper.
What's going on? What's going on, world? This is episode 115 of Think Like a Rapper. And this is definitely the first legend that I've had on the podcast. I think everybody's a legend in their own right, but she has been an advocate for rappers, artists in general for about 3 decades. She's a writer, founder of Rap Coalition, CEO of Power Moves, and just was it recently created Artist Centric, which is
Yes, it's an incubator
to learn how to scale independent labels and make things profitable, which is always the hardest thing to do in the music industry.
Of course, therefore my biggest goal.
Yeah, exactly. We have Wendy Day on the podcast, Philly's finest.
Woohoo! I'm a Philly girl.
Yeah, thank you. I spent Knowledge and I from Kids in the Hall. I mean, essentially Kids in the Hall is, even though it's always associated with Chicago, you know, our independent spirit and all of our ideas come from our time at the University of Pennsylvania in Philly. You know, being there when the Roots were figuring things out, when State Property, Freeway, and Beanie, and also even when, you know, John Legend was a year ahead of me. And I think a lot of the independent mindset somehow was, I guess, in the air at that point. And so, yeah.
My love of hip hop started at University of Pennsylvania.
Really? So let's start there. What is,
okay.
Where does that begin for you?
In 1980, you probably were not born yet.
I was a year old.
I was gonna say you were a baby, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I went to a fall fling, and you know how University of Pennsylvania did it. Penn always had a bunch of different artists come through to kind of prove their diversity, right? Mm-hmm. So in the fall of 1980, they had the Psychedelic Furs come through, which I was a fan of. They had the E Street Band, minus Bruce Springsteen, come through. And they had a brand new rap group called Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. And they opened the show. And I fell in love with the energy and the passion of the music. And that started it. Like, I came to this as a fan. I didn't work in music until 1992, but I've been listening to rap since 1980, like hardcore.
And what was the shit? It's amazing. I mean, I not that they're in the same way, but I try to be mindful now, having sort of been a part of burgeoning movements and ideas, especially in this time right now, these things that you see that are in sort of fledgling stage that will eventually potentially become disruptive in some, you know, in very interesting ways. What was it about rap, even in that early stage, that made you say, like, this is not only just, you know, something that's a cool band to listen to, but I want to know everything and all about everything.
Everything. It was the energy and the passion and the storytelling in the music, and that's what really sucked me in. I started going to Sound of Market Street, which was a record store at the time, an independent record store on Market Street. I used to go in every Tuesday, which is when music was released. And the guy that I dealt with at the store had either friends or family in New York City that were sending him live cassette tapes from the clubs. So on Tuesday when I would go in, not only was I buying whatever the hot vinyl was that was, you know, coming out that week, but I was also accessing cassettes of live club shows and then, you know, of recordings. And then after that, I started getting recordings from Mr. Magic and Marley Marl show, but that was many years later. But what it did was it took me on this path. So I started listening to pretty much all the rap that I could get my hands on, whether it was live or recorded. And that took me into the late 80s, where I started listening to Slick Rick, Dougie Fresh, Public Enemy, X-Clan. And in one of Chuck D's lyrics, he was talking about Malcolm X. And I wanted to know more about who that was. Like, it really, like, Malcolm's struggle really intrigued me. And it led me down another path into African American studies. I went and got a master's at Temple University. I was in New York at the time. I had already moved to New York by 87. And this intrigued me enough that I started commuting back to Philly, because Temple had an Afrocentric master's degree, and I wanted the Afrocentric program. From there, I moved to Montreal to work in the liquor industry, and I ended up getting an MBA. My plan was always to go to Wharton to get an MBA, but when I was in Montreal, I saw McGill had an MBA program that rivaled Harvard, and I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. I'm gonna start taking classes. And I worked out a deal. I was a vice president of marketing at the liquor company. I worked out a deal with my boss where I could get my MBA during the day. I didn't want to go to night school, because I always heard that the night classes were a little easier, and that the degree wasn't as respected when you went to night school as when you went to the day classes. So his response to me was, yeah, I don't care. Like, cool, you can do that. Just don't let it affect your work. So I'm like, okay, I won't. And if I start to slip, let me know. So there was incentive for me to be able to do both successfully. And somehow I was. So I was able to get an MBA at McGill, which is an incredible school. And it was really affordable because I was a landed immigrant at that time in Montreal. So I think I was paying like $30 a credit to get this, like, equivalent to Harvard education. It was awesome.
No, it's amazing. Canada always surprises me in how certain things just become so cheap. I was on tour there with an artist, and I'd gotten sick, and I think I was in and out of the doctor in like 30 minutes and paid $50 for like penicillin, full on, and I was just like, man, if this would have happened anywhere else, you'd have been broke. I know. But in 92, what everybody starts oftentimes as a fan, and a lot of people stay as fans. What was the impetus to say, though, I'm going to take this extra step. I'm going to take this leap into almost immediately being an advocate, giving back into the culture. That's
exactly what it was. I felt like I wanted to give back for all of the happiness and the excitement that the music brought me. At the time, I was a fan of Eric B. and Rakim and X-Clan, and I had heard how they got jerked by their label. And because of my background in Black studies, I assumed that it was only Black artists that were being taken advantage of. And this is not a denial of racism, because racism exists, white privilege exists. So this is not a denial of that. But I did learn that kind of all artists get fucked over. It wasn't just, it wasn't just Black artists. I mean, I'm sure that Black artists get it far worse than white artists, just because of the racial element. But having said that, at the time, I thought it was unique to Black artists, and it really pissed me off. So I decided to use my privilege and my voice and my energy and my background to help people of color. And I had always known that the way out of the struggle was to be self-proficient, to start your own company and change your economics. And then that would, of course, change your situation in life. And I wanted to help artists become more in control, more self-sufficient, and certainly financially empowered, so that they could do whatever they wanted. And in my mind, their careers would last longer. And of course, I proved that fact just by the artists that I've been able to help in the music industry. A lot of them still have careers today and are still relevant. And that was always kind of my goal. I didn't want rappers to be one-hit wonders. And I saw how the powers that be in the music industry were treating rap, even today, like, 30 plus fucking years later. And I still feel like sometimes the CEOs at labels think that rap is a fad. It's like, okay, if 35 or 40 years means fad, good on you, But that was my impetus to start Rap Coalition. I had made money in the liquor industry when I was in Montreal. When I came back to the US, I was looking for something to do. I wanted to help people of color start businesses. I wanted to have an outlet for my activism, but I wanted it to really make a difference. I didn't want to just be somebody on the front lines, petitioning or protesting. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I didn't want it to be like 40 or 50 years down the line and there were no changes. So I decided that I wanted to change it. I don't want to say from the inside because I've never really been on the inside of labels, but I wanted to change it on the inside of culture and became very engulfed in hip hop and the culture.
No, it's amazing. I think that, especially in this time, it does feel a little, there's a lot of pressure on celebrities now and artists, and it's been crazy on Twitter to have to be very vocal and very upfront about what they're doing to affect change.
The world.
Yeah, and sometimes it feels a little bit disingenuous from the people who are demanding of it because yes, there are people that need to be on the front lines, but then there are also people that, like you
but
said,
not everybody.
Exactly. And you see that there is ways in which you can empower generations, really.
Yes.
I mean, because
Yes.
Yes. you've been a part of some of the biggest deals ever in the music industry. And, because of that, the Master P's grandkids, baby,
right. Grandkids.
Exactly.
Yes.
Are going to be well off. But it's funny.
I've also been really involved, like not just the deals, although I'm very proud of them. I've also been very involved in helping to mentor and build a lot of careers in the music industry. I remember when I started, one of the executives, and I don't remember now who it was. I wish I had paid more attention to who it was. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize this would be one of those life-defining moments. But I remember a white executive saying to me that if it weren't for rap, people who were otherwise unemployable would not have jobs. And I remember how much that fucked me up when he said that. And I remember thinking, oh, hell no. Like, we're not going to go out like that. We definitely need to empower employees in the music industry and help people grow in their careers, not just so that they can get better at their jobs, but so that they can take over and have control and write checks and have power in the music industry. I'm a little bit sad that hasn't happened sooner. It's still an ongoing process. I thought it would happen a lot faster than it has. But I still feel like people of color are hitting a ceiling within the major label system. So that's an area that I think we need to be really aware of. And that's an area where we just, as an industry, need to really grow.
Do you think that is because a lot of the CEOs and even the C-suite execs and maybe even shareholders are still from an extremely, like we said before, an archaic time where rap to them is still a fad? Or is it that sometimes I wonder if it is, you know, everyone always talks about, when we talk about racism, right? We always talk about this, like, oh, when the old guard dies off, it'll be fine because there will be, you know, new people.
No,
But
the new
oftentimes,
guard's a problem too.
exactly. And so, you know, is it because inherently the music industry is training bad tactics or bad sort of business as it inherent to its core, because at its core it's an exploitive business, right?
It's a very exploitive business.
And there is
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't want to
no
cut
no
you off.
no 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 sorry, I was just going to say that I think that you know, not to relate this to the much larger
I think it does relate to the much larger.
yeah, that there
Keep
is
going.
that capitalism and racism are this thing that are intertwined,
Right.
and that, especially as we see what's happening now on the streets, um, dismantling racism in a real way, in the way in which the system cannot benefit from it, may mean dismantling the way that we understand capitalism as we know it, and having to reform sort of a new idea. And it's the same thing as, you know, especially when you deal in other industries, but you started in the music industry, you always realize, like, why is, you know, it's at its core, it's again exploitation. You have an artist that can create this thing maybe by themselves, maybe with a little bit of help, with a little bit of investment, but they then have to give up all of these rights and all of this IP in order
Right.
for you to help them become successful. And it's never done in a mutually beneficial way. It's always done in a way where not only am I, the record label, being paid from day one, but I'm also receiving percentages off of your, you know, of your cut. Um, you know, essentially in perpetuity, especially if there's
Right.
the way to do the magical accounting where you
Right.
never know how much you've actually spent.
And the labels own part of Spotify, so they're collecting on the platform where people consume music as well, and they don't have to share that with the artist because the corporation owns that ownership.
Yeah, and so does the entire thing need to be dismantled?
I
Or
believe so.
is okay. So you don't think that there's something that maybe record labels could do, major labels specifically could do right, that would change?
I think that they will, because as artists become more entrepreneurial and more self-sufficient, they're going to need them less and less. And I think when you no longer have a stranglehold on a situation, that things right themselves. And you know, there's so much to unpack in what you said, because, and maybe I have rose-colored glasses, but I think that there's a, in general, in human beings, there's an like, people aren't enlightened as a whole.
Mhm.
People tend to hang around with people that look like them, people that they're comfortable with. People tend to hire people that they're comfortable with that look like them. And that creates this systemic problem because there's no diversity. So you're going to work every day and you're around people that think like you and come from backgrounds like you and have experiences like you, so you don't have to stop and think, oh, what is it like to be Asian, or what is it like to be female, or what is it like to be older, or what is it like to be of color, or, you know, what is it like to be Muslim or Jewish or Christian or whatever. People don't really look outside of their own little bubble. And I think that that creates all kinds of isms, not just racism, right?
Yeah.
All kinds of issues. There's materialism. There's, you know, capitalism is certainly a problem. And I don't know that there's a better way. So I'm not advocating for a different system. I'm just saying that when oppressed people are oppressed for long enough, at some point they're going to stand up and say enough. And that happened in the music business early in my career, when artists started to realize, the master P's, the Cash Moneys, that they could do this themselves, that they really didn't need the major labels. The major labels reacted by offering more money. Their solution was, okay, instead of giving somebody $250,000 to sign to us, we're going to offer $30 million. Now let's see these motherfuckers say no, and it made it very hard for people that have business minds to say no, because the deals were just too financially lucrative. So they started doing these wonderful deals, and then the labels started throwing more and more money at them. They would get more and more into debt. And as they got more and more into debt, the labels started taking more and more ownership of those independent labels, until all of a sudden folks woke up one day and they were completely owned by the major label, like No Limit, like Cash Money today. And that kind of defeats my whole game plan on the artists having control of their own art form, because if they're just going to get into debt and eventually lose it to the major label anyway, what's the fucking point of doing deals with the majors? So now my mindset is, okay, what do we really need the major labels for? We need them for access. We need them for funding. And we need them for their know-how. So I have found other ways to fund. I have found other ways to find know-how. And I have found other ways to gain access. I can hire the same people that, Atlantic or Interscope hires to get their music in front of the masses. So effectively, they're not as necessary as they once were, which in itself is going to eventually right the problem. Either they're going to completely go away and start making money elsewhere, like podcasts, or they're going to have to be a little bit more inclusive in how they do things. I was pretty hard on the labels yesterday. We had the industry took a day to sort of, regroup and discuss within our own confines of how we want to move forward to change society, because, art changes society. And the labels joined in that. And at first I was a little hard on them. I was like, man, this is so disingenuous. You guys aren't putting any people of color in powerful positions, but you're willing to shut the company down for a day to let your employees have a day off and talk amongst themselves, when in reality you need to listen and let them gain power and ownership within the corporation. And I feel like I may have been a little bit unfair in my criticism, because as I started discussing with people in the industry yesterday and today about what occurred yesterday, I realized that the labels do care a little bit more than I thought they had. And I'm really encouraged by not just the discussion, but the listening that went on, where white folks in power really started to listen and try to understand what the issues are within their own corporation and their own confines. And now I'm just waiting to see what they do. I'm encouraged though, because I think some change might actually come out of this. If it doesn't, I'm going to blast the shit out of them. But I'm hopeful. For the first time in 28 years of being in the music industry, I'm actually fucking hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, you're better than me. I think that unless they are willing to eliminate the idea of recoup, I feel like the way in which that's structured is a fundamental issue to the way all deals are done.
I agree. It's coming. And can we explain that so that the listeners, they probably already know, but just in case they don't, recouping is where you have to pay back everything that was spent on your career, but you're paying it back out of your share. So if you only have a 15% share of the income with your record label, you're paying back the millions of dollars that were spent on you from your 15%. It's not coming off the top and then you get your 15%. Recouping means you're paying everything back out of your share.
Yeah, and they
look ahead. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Oh no, you're right. And it's on them to negotiate the smallest share for you, so that I mean, to for a very layman's example, imagine, let's say CDs back in the day, $10. Let's say $10 was going back to the label. It wasn't, but you were negotiated essentially $1 off of every CD, and they gave you $1 million advance, marketing, all those sorts of things. They made $9 from day one, and you made $0 until you paid back that $1 million from
out of your dollar.
dollar.
And by the way, it wasn't $1. You're being very generous, but yes,
of course,
like your example is absolutely nailing it. And that's been my fundamental frustration. You know, I kind of equate it like a mortgage, right? But at least with a mortgage, when you pay it back, you own the house. This is like paying back a mortgage and then you don't own the house when you've paid it back. It's insane to me. It's sharecropping. Really.
That's exactly what it is. And it to me, any deal that has that on the table just doesn't make sense anymore.
Agreed.
And it, once an artist finds out that is the case, you know, because I've been one of those people that was never actually mad initially, had they done it correctly, at the idea of a 360 deal, in the way that, even though Lior and co tried to take credit for it, to me, I will always give the credit of the 360 deal to Disney, because Disney were the originators of those ideas, where it's like, we will sign this person. They get a TV show, they get a record deal, they get books, they get toys, cartoons, all these things, and we'll profit off of all of it. And, you know, but we can do all of these things, and it'll be an amazing, way in which we are tapped into all of these revenue streams, but that person will also make sure that person becomes incredibly famous in order to really
and they'll go and help you get the book deal, and help you get the deal for the toy, and help you go on tour, and help you get the recording contract. Like, they actually do the work. And when the 360 deals started in the music industry, you know, not to pound on the labels, that's not why I'm here today, but they started taking a bigger percentage and doing none of the work. And that's the problem I had with it.
Yeah. And they're slowly figuring it out now. They got merch companies together. They built their relationships with the booking agents, and now it certainly makes sense. But I do wonder, on the call yesterday, and kind of how you've been operating through the first half of this year, seeing that we're in this weird space now where streaming numbers have gone down. Touring is obviously non-existent. There are ways in which digitally people are starting to find ways of making income, but ultimately the way in which the revenue pie was broken up a year ago is all but eliminated, or fundamentally changed forever. What do you think, or what did you maybe hear on the call yesterday that gives you some idea of what the future might be for the music industry, and the way in which we're at this time now where I feel like we can fundamentally change a lot of things, but the way in which that might help change sort of revenue structure for both artists and—
Absolutely. For my clients, it really hasn't changed much at all, because as independents, while they made money touring, they were more like smaller venues, which are starting to reopen now.
Okay.
So it killed their income. Probably 90 days is realistic, maybe 120 days, depending on when cities are going to open back up the smaller clubs. A lot of my clients shifted to doing house parties, because the younger generation didn't think that they could really catch COVID. So they started renting Airbnbs and doing what people do, you know, inviting all their friends together. Everybody would pay $20 or $30 to come into this house and have a party, and they would pay the artist to come through and not only hang out with them, but maybe do a song or two. Yeah. So a lot of my artists haven't been adversely affected yet. Also, when we start working with artists, we start building their text list or their email list, so they can go right to the client, right to the customer, the fan, right? So my guys all start merch companies immediately. They don't wait until they're famous to start a merch company. They start it right away, because they're able to tap into their fans that want to buy their merchandise. So they're able to make more money through merch than they were in the past. a lot of the fans lost their jobs, so they didn't really have the money to devote. So they're figuring out other ways to make money, whether it's going live or whether it's one of my artists is actually doing voicemail messages for his fans, and he's getting $20 every time he does one. He's doing a lot of features with other artists. As independents, they don't need permission from a label in order to do a feature with somebody. So they're doing more features and getting paid for it. So the income is there, and I don't want to mislead you and say it hasn't been impacted. It has, but they're not starving. Like, there's not one client that I'm working with right now that's really tripping financially. They've all still have income. They're all still hustling. Just they've changed their focus from how they made money before, which was shows and doing other streams of income to make money. There's a lot of guys making money in film and TV by licensing music. So they've gotten, stepped up and gotten a lot more aggressive in that stream so that they could make more money.
Let's pull on that thread a little bit, because sometimes I think when it comes to independent artists, there's a bit of a, and maybe I'm just wrong, but having started with Raucous, having started in very, I think our first advance was like $15,000, something super sort of small. And it took a really long time to find any sort of money, at least back in the 2008, 2010 sort of space.
It was harder then.
Yeah. And a lot of the stuff just didn't exist. So for an artist today, I mean, Chance obviously beats the independent drum really strongly. And I agree with him in a lot of ways, but I know that sometimes fundamentally to scale to that size, there is this magical thing called money that people don't often talk about. And I know that you had mentioned in another interview in terms of the incubator and Artist-Centric that, like, basically if you don't have $250,000 to really start an independent label, it's going to be, I assume, fairly difficult to
very difficult
to get it going. So specifically for the independent artists, it's truly independent. They're just sitting in front of their computer right now, making music. They like it, trying to figure it out. What are those ways in which they can initially sort of build that following and get to maybe some sort of income, even if it's not life-changing yet, but shifting into that, like, because you were talking about things like there were like $20 here or $20 here for a house party. These are smaller chunks of money, but they constantly add up.
They add up.
Especially.
Yeah.
In ways, I think it's really hard from people to go from zero to what to do next to get to 25 to 40%. Without giving too much of the goods up, because this is obviously what you do.
Right.
What are some of the ways that artists can figure out how to take that first step if they aren't sitting on?
And I'm so happy to give up the goods, even though that's how I make a living. Like, you probably have noticed, I share information very freely. Yeah. But what they can do is, if they can't find an investor, or they don't want to find an investor, somebody to really help them with a larger chunk of money, and they just want to do it themselves, where they just have like a couple hundred here, a couple thousand there, I would put the money into building myself up digitally. I would also work in the real world, so I don't want to imply that somebody can sit behind their laptop or their phone and become famous. It doesn't work that way. But as they're working their music, I would focus more digitally, because digitally I can reach an awful lot of people for a relatively small amount of money. And as I build my fan base and I start to notice who my fans are, I can really kind of hone in and drill down on who that fan is, and then start advertising to those people and people like them, so that I can really maximize my spend, right?
Are you big on Facebook advertising and
yes,
things
and
like
Google
that?
ads and YouTube ads? Absolutely. Influencer marketing, which is where you're paying people that have a lot of followers on Instagram. And I don't mean like Kim Kardashian.
Yeah.
That's almost too big, right? But somebody that has anywhere from 50,000 to 150,000 followers, they've got enough of a fan base for what they're doing to share music with their fan base. And it's relatively affordable. You can do that depending on who it is. You can do that for, $50 to a couple thousand. So you just have to really choose wisely. You have to make sure you've got the right music completed so that when you do it, it's songs that people will embrace. And you've got to just be pretty good at honing in on the people that you want to reach.
Yeah, I try to keep abreast to everything going on in terms of the digital space. But even for me, someone who's been in the industry for years, it often times feels a little confusing in where those spends should go. I mean, a decade ago, you'd kind of say, okay, I'm going to hire this publicist that's going to get me on the blogs. I'm going to,
yeah, not anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to spend this money on, shooting a music video for $2,500 and getting that up and out there. Are there, I wouldn't say surefire ways, but are there things that are definitely worth it every time, or does it change? Because
it changes. It's different for every artist because every artist has a different market. Like there are some markets where your music is best reached hitting 13 to 17-year-olds, right? So then you go to TikTok. Then there's some artists that may be a little bit more street, so they're going to do better going into the hood and interacting with people, one-on-one, or attending an event like a barbecue where they're performing maybe for free, but they're building their fan base a little bit more solid. Then there's artists where they reach a more college educated market, so they can go to a college campus and, start interacting with fans. So every artist is different and every fan is different. So you've got to market to the people that will actually embrace your music. You can't just sort of be a shotgun and hit everybody.
Yeah.
That just won't work.
Yeah, especially with in dealing with small amounts of money because you just don't have a big enough gun. To shift a little bit, for the person that does have $100,000, 150, $250,000, they often also spend money in places that were unnecessary. What are the core things, if you do have a little bit of that investment, that you should be spending on? Is it in hiring all of these sort of freelancers, whether it be
not if you don't have a lot of money. If you're gonna start hiring people, you're gonna have to have tens of thousands of dollars because it's the repetition and the consistency. You can't just hire somebody for a month and help you blitz. You've got to hire them for like 3 months and help you blitz, right? So if you're not gonna do this yourself, you're gonna absolutely have to have an investor. And I've got videos on my YouTube channel. Let me do a shameless plug. It's free, right? So it's youtube.com/thisiswendyday. But I've got, almost 200 videos on there talking about all these different aspects that you and I are talking about, because it's kind of different for every type of artist. But if you're not gonna find an investor to help you really fund this properly, and you're going to do it piecemeal by yourself, you can absolutely do that, but you really can't waste a dollar. You've really got to hone in on who your market is and how you're going to reach them. And the best way to do that is to figure out exactly what you want to do. Talk to people that are doing this already and find out what works and what doesn't. Like, for example, one of the things that every rapper wants to do is hit World Star. And if nobody knows who you are, posting on World Star isn't going to bring you any attention. It's just going to bring out the haters saying that you're whack, whether you're whack or not, because they don't know who you are. And World Star does not exist to break rappers. That's not where people go to find new music. So it's really a waste of your money unless you've already got a name and people know who you are. So something like that, as a new artist, you wouldn't know that unless you had access to somebody like a me or a you, where you could say, hey, you've done World Star before. Does that work for you? Fuck no, not unless you're an established artist and people know who you are. But that's how you learn. You learn by banging your head. And then we just hope that people are open enough to share with other people where they bang their head, so that the new person doesn't have to bang their head too.
Yeah, I think that it is a much needed reminder to especially young artists, is that this is also all not figured out, because every channel, every pathway it's not a surefire for anybody, and how most people get on or find success, relationships, all of those things can be just random. Like for me, when I was in Philly, I would have, the couple of connections. I was like a college rep for Atlantic. I would just called A&Rs. And I remember having like some R&B artists that I was representing in college at the same time, like singing on the streets of West Philly for like Boys to Men security guard. And it worked. We got in the studio the next day, but nothing ever came of that. And then Kids in the Hall begins its inroads because I was working at T-Mobile at the time when the Sidekick first came out. And the Sidekick was my way to get onto video sets and get into people's ears because it was a product that they wanted. And I essentially wanted the relationship. And so I was able to sort of build the relationships that would become extremely useful when it was time to actually play music later on. And yeah, you don't really know a way. But what I will say, and I'm sure you can attest to this as well, is asking for handouts is never the way in which any of this stuff usually works out. And it's also the way if they recognize that you do have some sort of talent and want to really sort of and utilize it, that's the easiest way for you to get put in an extremely bad position and get locked up in either a deal or anything like that. I think sometimes artists, and this is actually the same issue that is happening today on Twitter when it came, or today figuratively, but the idea that like these people that have done all of this stuff, built stuff from nothing or what have you, owe you something, owe you an explanation, owe you because they've made money, they somehow owe you some of their money, or or what have you. And yeah, it's never been the way to get put on, and it's never the way to actually get any sort of real action.
There is no put on. And it's funny, I don't know who started that rumor that you get put on in the music industry, because you don't. It's a business, and people want to do business with you when they see they can make money either off of you or with you. And in a perfect world, you want them to make money with you, not off of you, right? You don't want somebody making all the money and you make nothing. So you don't want to get pimped out, but you've got to learn how this business works so that that doesn't happen.
No, definitely. If you were given the reins of Warner right now, right? Or Universal, what is your sort of big picture view of how you would want artists to be treated in the future, or the way that even deals would be structured in like a new industry sort of?
Right. I would turn it into a giant incubator, sort of like what I'm building with Artist Centric. I just feel that the best way to build a feasible, profitable, happy company is to partner with the artist and show them exactly how to create income for themselves and how to sustain themselves so that they can make money for future generations, and how they could, if they want to build a successful label. Some artists don't. Not every artist is an entrepreneur. Some just want to sign to a label and just be the artist, and that's fine. But the ones that don't want that, and the ones that want to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, the Frank Oceans, the Chance the Rappers, they should be encouraged and supported to become that. And I feel that it's a label's job as their partner to help them grow and become the best artist and the best human beings that they can be. We're not selling cogs here. We're not selling doodads here. They're actual human beings. And sometimes we forget that, just like if you're running a company that sells cogs or doodads, you want to build your cog or your doodad to be the best out there. You want a really great product. So why aren't we doing that with the artists as well? Why aren't we empowering them and nurturing them to become the best cog or the best doodad as an artist. You know, it's almost unconscionable that we don't, because they are human beings. It's
No,
almost like we're supposed to do that and we don't.
yeah, and I think that goes back to, again, the origins of the entire idea is that the artist and the culture around it and the power of music, I feel, I know some disagree with me, but is fundamentally is just never respected in the way that it should be until it's too late. You know,
Right.
and you see that, you know, now, you know, a couple of weeks ago with obviously Instagram starting to take down these DJs who have created a whole new pathway for DJs to make money. And now all of a sudden there are all these copyright sort of takedowns, rather than the industry saying, okay, this is what it is now. Let's do this blanket deal with Instagram or Facebook or whoever so that
Let's
we can
pivot.
operate this way. It's like, nope, we're still
Yes.
going to take things out. And even if you were to argue that, oh, it's happening in good faith because the labels want the artist to get paid, they're also the people getting paid last after all of that. So if that was true,
Absolutely.
you know, then it would be, then their deals would be structured different. I did want to shift a little bit because you did mention the podcast thing a little bit. And they are these weird, nebulous digital media products that can be paid for upfront, and no one really has to worry about residuals with them.
There's no royalties, at
For,
least not yet.
for
It's
now, exactly. I feel like it's 100% coming. But do you think that, you know, Spotify's big deals with Anchor and now with Joe Rogan mean that we're going to be in this weird space with digital media now on the same platform battling each other, and because again Spotify knows they can just pay him one fee up front for a certain amount of time and never worry about it again, whereas Drake still has to get paid every quarter for the same amount of streams, you know.
Yes.
The,
Yes.
the battle
And you know, I
begins.
don't have a crystal ball, so I can't predict how popular podcasts will become, but I do know that anytime you're competing for somebody's attention or for their ears or eyeballs, that it is competition. So if people are going to devote their time to watching a YouTube video or listening to a podcast or streaming music or playing a video game, you know, like on their phone or whatever, as a commodity or a delivery system, you've got to figure out what is the most viable stream for you to be involved with financially. So if as a business I can make more money bringing podcasts to the people than I can bringing video games or music or whatever else, then that's the lane I'm going to go down, right? Because that's what capitalism is all about. You figure out what gives you the best return on investment with the least amount of blowback, and you take that path.
Yeah.
Right? So if that is podcasts, then I totally get why Spotify is doing this or Apple is doing this or SoundCloud or whoever. You know, I totally get it. I can see why they would do that. Is that going to be more profitable? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, just like you don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know. We're just kind of along for the ride to see where this takes us to. And then at some point, just like early in the music business where artists didn't get paid royalties, all the money went to the label, at some point, are the podcasters going to realize, hey, I'm getting fame, but I'm not getting money. So now we need a podcast coalition. And now Spotify or Apple is going to have to pay us 0.0007 cents every time, you know, our podcast plays. Are we going to get to that point in time? I don't know. I guess it really depends on how popular podcasts become.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting because I think they were doing the math and they were saying that immediately, if Joe Rogan's entire podcasts for the amount of years he's been doing it go on Spotify, I think he beats Drake by 2 billion streams. I
Wow.
think it's 28 billion versus 26 billion streams.
Okay.
So then he becomes the big kahuna. And what does that mean, for the way in which every company treats its superstars or its big commodities? But
it certainly means that his voice has power. Like everything else being equal, and it's not, but let's just say it is, like that's really powerful. This is a man
definitely.
who can foment change. If he's got a bigger fan base than Drake, then kind of what he says matters, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know he's been going through his own internal battles with that, but I think at a certain point, you do have to realize that once you scale, that your what you say matters, and you can't kind of hide behind, oh, I'm just an entertainer. And to piggyback
Right.
off of that, we are now in this, you've been in the industry for 3 decades. We are in this space now where our most famous rappers are getting into their late 40s, early 50s. Hip hop culture is the biggest cultural export out of America. In the time that we exist now, what do you think the responsibility is for artists to speak to the larger problems, or speak to the larger issues at hand? I mean, obviously we've seen people evolve, people like Bun B and Trey the Truth, T.I. really putting their Killer Mike, really stepping up and wanting to step into that spotlight. But do you think that now the responsibility, all these guys at some point were just young knuckleheads trying to figure it out and figured out a way to make a lot of money through something that they love? For the older generation of rappers, what do you think their responsibility is now to the culture?
I lost you.
Oh, sorry.
And that was such an important one. Okay, the last thing I heard was Trey the Truth, Bun B, Killer Mike. I said T.I. and then you froze.
Oh, yeah, because I also said T.I. No,
I missed that. Okay.
For the older generation, this essentially they're a new older generation, right? They are the first generation of elder statesmen. What do you think their responsibility is now to the culture, or to the younger people in general, and how they have to handle that new phase of hip hop, like?
Right. I think that I would never thrust a voice on someone that doesn't want a voice, because at the end of the day, this is entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never want to put a gun to somebody's head and say, you must speak, you must stand up. So for those who feel the call to speak their voice, I think it's a wonderful thing, because within culture, people really want to hear what they have to say. Like, it's big news when Jay-Z calls the governor of Minnesota and says, hey, these cops have to get fired. Hey, this is a problem. Hey, you've got to do something about that. Yeah. I love that he's using his voice. He didn't always. And I was always one of the people that said he doesn't have to. Like, just because you're in the public eye does not mean you have to use your power for good. It's not fair to force somebody to do that, because if you're forcing them to do that, then you also have to accept that there are people out there that are going to use their voice for evil or for bad. And you can't say one person has to do it and another person shouldn't do it. It's either all or nothing. Like, you don't get to pick and choose. So I would rather support those that want to have a voice and want to use their fame to help society, as opposed to forcing somebody to speak that either isn't ready for it or has an opinion that maybe they shouldn't share. I don't know that, like, Michael Jackson or R. Kelly should share publicly how they think, right? Because we don't necessarily agree with everything that they think.
Yeah.
So I just don't feel that people should have to speak up and speak out loud just because they have a lot of eyes on them. It's not fair.
And then if they do, they should be at least very cognizant of what
their
weight
power entails. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But internally, in terms of culture, do you think that there does need to be this shift of the elder statesmen sort of trying to help make sure that history doesn't repeat itself?
Yes. I would love that. I would love that. I think that's our job, just all of us as we age. I think that instead of criticizing the younger generation or calling it mumble rap, or, you know, when I was a kid, it was my grandmother saying, "You young whippersnapper," you know, and I used to like, yeah, you used to walk a mile to school, bread was 5 cents. Like, I would play it to the left because it was judgmental and critical. So instead of us being judgmental and critical, I think it's up to us to help educate and help empower the generation coming up behind us, whether we like their output or not. You know, I'm really lucky in that I started listening to rap really early. So I watched it go through so many changes and so many different growth patterns that I realized that it's going to keep growing. It's going to keep changing. Whether I like it or not doesn't matter. If I don't like what's happening today, I can wait a couple of years and something new is going to come along anyway. So whether I like the current sound of music is really irrelevant. What matters is the market that it's directed to. Do they like it? Are they finding value in it? Are they still embracing it? And based on the continued growth pattern of hip hop, it tells me that yes, like the fans still like it, whether you and I are frustrated because we call it mumble rap, or, you know, I personally think that the drug culture is a problem. You know, just like I'm sure the people before me thought gangster rap was a problem. You know, they thought fuck the police was a problem. I thought it was just an outcry of what was going on the streets. So I could see where somebody younger might say to me, "Okay, Wendy, you don't like drug rap? Fix the fucking problem. Like, get rid of drug addiction." And they'd have every right to say that, because I'm not on the front line the way they are in terms of youth and culture. Right. So it's easy for me to sit back in my house and say, "You stop with the opioid addiction. You're hurting yourselves." Okay, great. You know, that's what my grandmother said to me when I used to smoke weed. You know, "Don't smoke weed. It's a gateway drug. You're going to become addicted to heroin." Well, grandma, I never did. But yeah, as we get older, we have to embrace the youth and help, not be critical and judgmental. I guess that's my point.
No, I agree. I think it's I think this time, especially with what's unfolding in this year, it's extremely important to walk with respect and empathy with everybody, because a lot of this, whether you question it or not, is the result of all these underlying things that have been bubbling up for a while, whether it be the opioid crisis, whether it be the financial crisis from 2008. If you were 18, you know, you're barely 30 right now. If you were 18 and 2008 happened, you know, your entire young adult life is framed in chaos and the stripping of whatever the idea was of the American dream. And so, you know, so many people in that space have a right to feel like the whole thing needs to be rebuilt and redone.
Yes.
And if you're an artist and you've also been complaining about, you know, industry rule 4080 since 1991, then you know that it is often the same thing. Because of capitalism, these two ideas have always been intertwined. And to me, part of the success of hip hop has been that it is so closely mirrored on and is a microcosm of the American dream in its in the most heroic way, right? The ability to come from nothing and build this huge identity and almost fantasy around your success. It is only right that those two things, in order to, are they are Siamese twins, I guess, in a way. And if you can complain about your record deal, or you can complain about what the labels aren't doing, then you should be able to easily see the frustrations that the youth have with culture in general, even if you're no longer sort of in that space.
And the way you find that out is by listening and interacting and talking and understanding. And I think that's what we need to do more of, especially in life in general, not just in the music business, but in life. I think we have to be more enlightened, and we have to really communicate with each other and try to see each other's points of view.
Yeah, no, definitely. And for you individually, recently, it seems like you rededicated yourself to being an advocate, even though you've been one this entire time. What was what made you sort of rededicate yourself to being that? The see that you on your Instagram, you have obviously a couple points with which you wanted to continue to do so. So what made you kind of circle back? And
I think it's been, it never ended. I did get a little bit less opinionated and a little bit less vocal, because my focus really became helping rappers make money with their music. So I got a little bit less socially active or politically active. Trump becoming president was probably the start of what reignited my fire. I really don't like how this country has gone. And I have made more money since he's been in office personally. So I have more to gain with him in office. But I think as the human race in America, we've become far worse with him in office. So that was the start of it. And then watching so many young Black males, not just males, but young Black people dying at the hands of people that are supposed to protect and serve. I've just noticed that the police are becoming more and more emboldened and more power happy. And I've noticed it personally, and I've noticed it in culture at large. And a lot of that is because we have smartphones, right? Yeah. So we're filming everything. So we're seeing it more. But I've noticed it, like, just in my own community in the suburbs of Atlanta, that the police are becoming more and more power hungry, less and less engaged with the community. And it's as the United States as a whole, I'm seeing that get worse and worse and worse. Even just the reaction to the protesters, like the cops are shooting rubber bullets at people that are protesting peacefully. They're not even becoming enraged, and they're getting fired upon. They're arresting and shooting at journalists. Like, when the fuck did we do that? And they're very emboldened by the powers that be, the powers in charge right now. So I'm becoming more vocal politically. I'm voting more than I ever have. In the past, I'd say 2 decades, like since George Bush II, I became, like, my vote, I really pay attention, not just for presidential races, but like, I want to know who are the DAs that are being voted in? Who are the judges being voted in? What do they think? What are their backgrounds? Like, I'm becoming way more politically involved and active. I'm watching young people not be able to pay back their student loans. I'm watching young people having to resort to credit card scams in order to feed themselves. Like, this is not acceptable at all. And then when COVID hit, and I watched how other countries responded versus how we have responded, I'm like, oh, hell no. And then I caught COVID, like I caught the
Oh,
coronavirus.
really?
Yes, in March, like a really mild case. But, you know, the cough lasted for like 5 weeks. But when I first started to get sick, I was panicked. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to fucking die from the flu. Like all the shit that I've survived in my life and my career, and the flu is going to take me out. Oh, hell no. You know? So that added to it. And then all of a sudden, like George Floyd just happened at the right time when I was in the right mood for the right reason. And he was a rapper. Oh no. So that was really, that wasn't the beginning of it for me. That was the cutoff point. That was the point where I said, nope, not going to be able to do this anymore. Like I'm going to have to renew and find the time. And that's the hardest part for me, right? Is finding the time, because I'm so engrossed in my clients and helping rappers make money with their music that I'm now going to have to find time to become more political and more involved in my community so that this shit doesn't happen again and again and again like it's been happening.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's it's awesome. Reading that today was a, you know, the blackout yesterday, even though I'm sure it started with good intentions, felt very nebulous. And especially with people in the music industry, you know,
There was no agenda.
Yeah, I was one of those people who's like, if you're not giving back masters and publishing to older artists, if you're not making those larger sort of gestures, then it feels like it just feels like you're not really taking it seriously. Yeah,
disingenuous. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And so
Yes.
I really enjoyed, even though you've been an advocate, especially for rappers, for most of your adult life, that you still rededicated yourself to it. I thought was extremely important.
It was important to me. And there's part of me that didn't want to comment on that because really it's not anybody's business what I do. But I saw so many young people like calling others out for their dedication that I'm like, you know what? I shouldn't have to state this, but I am the old guard. Like I'm an older person in a young industry. And if I'm going to be in their industry, even though I helped build this, I'm in their industry. Yeah. So if I'm going to be in their industry, meaning the youth, I'm going to need to bring things the way they want to hear them. It's not about how I throw it. It's about how it's caught. Yeah. So I'm going to have to be out of my comfort zone, and I'm going to have to tell people, yeah, I donated X amount of dollars to Black Lives Matter. I donated money to the Change organization. I donated money to bail funds, even though I come from a world where that's crass. Like we don't do that. Yeah. We don't tell people how much money we gave to a cause or what we spent on something. Like I came up in a generation where that's just not acceptable, but it is to this generation. So I'm going to have to, if I'm going to live in your world, I'm going to need to understand your needs and your desires, and I'm going to need to speak to you in your language. And that's why I posted that last night.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, I think that oftentimes people get so stuck in their ways and are okay with the miscommunication because it allows them to be comfortable, that it takes obviously a lot more insight, and it takes a good empathy to take a step forward and say, you know what, I'm going to communicate in a way that you understand, and it's not really going to, you know, is it really going to affect your ego at the end of the day? No, because now it's out, they understand, and
yeah,
and I love
and
that.
And we keep it moving. And I'm very fortunate because I grew up poor in a wealthy neighborhood. I grew up Christian in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. I'm a white woman working in a predominantly Black male industry. Mm-hmm. And I'm comfortable being the outsider because that's how I grew up. So I'm really fortunate to have learned that at a young age so that I can be comfortable in my skin and where I am. When I moved to Montreal, I noticed that most people that speak English would not speak French to Francophones. And I didn't understand that. Like, why would you go into a country where people are comfortable speaking a certain language and not try to embrace them in their own language? And I learned, even though, you know, my French is pathetic, I learned that just making effort meant the world to people. So if something that small, just a gesture, is going to help people hear what I have to say and embrace me, why would I not do that? I'm not going to fight them and be like, oh, I'm only speaking English. Fuck you. I'm in your country. Like, the least I can do is learn the damn language. Like, so I'm really fortunate that I learned that at 27 years old. So when I go to South America, I'm going to study the language before I go there. When I go to the Middle East, I'm going to study Arabic. When I go to Japan, I'm going to study Japanese. When I go to China, I'm going to study Chinese. I may not be proficient, and I might depend on my Google app to translate for me, but I'm going to make enough effort that somebody who's a natural speaker of that language is going to be like, okay, she's trying. As long as she tries, I'm cool with that.
And that's the most important part. And I think that's a life lesson for everybody, to be okay with not only continually learning, but being okay with putting yourself in at a level of discomfort in order to make those sort of leaps. Because that, I think, is where you get to see about yourself, but you get to make potentially new relationships, you get to learn a bunch. And to me, it's the way you live life. That's the way you're supposed to live life in general.
Like, that's what you're supposed to do. Like, communication is key.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't think that. Like, they're not trying to learn, they're not trying to expand. They just want to go through life the way they are today. And I've never been that way. Like, I want to learn everything. I want my head to fucking explode.
Yeah. That's awesome. I just got one last one for you. What have you learned from hip hop that you use in your everyday life?
Kick in the door and wave the 4-4. I'm dead fucking serious. I learned from hip hop not to have fear. Like, if we want to accomplish something, whether people are accepting of us or not, we need to show up at the table and just sit down. If we want to own a company, just start it. If we want to win a marathon running, just fucking start running. That's what I learned from hip hop. I learned to not be afraid. I learned to embrace my own light and my own power. And I learned to not be silent or shrink for anything. I learned to kick in the door, and I learned to use my power, which is what I equate waving the 4-4. I don't have any 44s. I have none, but that's a different thing. But kick in the door and wave the 4-4. That's what I learned from hip hop.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thank you for your time. I love that you're doing this, because I know you don't get paid to do this. Nope. I know that you do this as a labor of love. And the fact that, what is this, episode 115, did you say?
Yes.
I fucking love you. Like, the fact that you have done this 114 times.
Well, I'm cheating. I just want you to know I'm cheating. I'm cheating, just so you know. The earlier iteration of it started in the ones, and then I mean in the zeros, and then I stopped, and for whatever reason I started at 101.
Okay.
And so now, so
that's okay. The point of that, that's okay. First of all, I love you for admitting that. But the fact that you have done this, even if this is the first one you've ever done, and it's not, but even if it were, like, you're giving up your time and your energy, and you're putting yourself out there for very little in return. And I love that. I love the fact that you love this crazy thing called hip hop enough to do this. And thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. I mean, if we can only, like I said, the responsibility to make sure that the younger generations can hopefully learn a little bit and not have to bump their head as hard as we do. So, yeah.